biblical words, words that have true biblical definitions, probably have more power to change culture than just about anything. And when you redefine those words, as the enemies of the gospel have done in our day, think of a word like marriage. When you redefine it, that also changes culture because it shapes the way people understand, it shapes the way they think, it gets embedded in a law. That law then goes on and teaches people about what marriage is, et cetera, et cetera.
Proverbs 18:21. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Words help shape our understanding of reality. God created through his word, and as his image bearers, we help craft meaning through our words. So everything from art to technology began with words. But the postmodern worldview has redefined crucial terms like truth, human, marriage, justice, freedom. And too often, the church has remained passive, allowing these distorted definitions of words to take root in our own thinking and in the way we talk. So it's time for the body of Christ to reclaim and restore words to their God-given meaning, grounding them in the ultimate authority of Scripture. Wow, how's that for a topic for today? Well, welcome to the Truth Changes Everything podcast. This is where we explore where God is at work changing everything through Jesus, who is the incarnation of the truth. And today, we're going to talk about how truth changes the way we define words and how that helps us understand our shaping of the world. So my guest today is Scott Allen. Scott's an author and a teacher on Christianity and culture, worldview, family, biblical justice, and poverty. He's the president of the Disciple Nations Alliance Global Secretariat Office. After serving with Food for the Hungry for 19 years in both the United States and in Japan, working in the area of human resources, staff training, program management, he teamed up with Daryl Miller and Bob Moffat to launch the DNA, the Discipleship Network Alliance, in 2008. So Scott's authored and co-authored numerous books, articles, and Bible studies. And we'll be talking specifically about one of his books, Why Social Justice is Not Biblical Justice. There are a number of other books, and you'll be able to see that. We'll give you the information at the end of the show about how to reach out to Discipleship Network Alliance. But for now, let's welcome Scott to the Truth Changes Everything podcast. Scott Allen, welcome to the Truth Changes Everything podcast.
Wow, what an honor to be here, Dr. Meyer, Jeff. If I can, it's such an honor to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, yes, and call me Jeff. The you and I have had a podcast before. You have a show. I've been on it a couple of times. People will know of you because of a book you wrote in 2019 that was perfectly timed for the cultural moment. Why Social Justice is Not Biblical Justice. And that became a bestseller, huge seller, because people were trying to figure out what is justice really, and how does society's definition either relate to or differ from a biblical perspective. So thank you for your work on that. I enjoyed the book, and I thought it was really balanced, brought a lot of clarity at a time when people were super confused.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Yeah, that, it was really providential, that book, the timing of it. It just came out right before the George Floyd kind of moment and the riots of 2020. And, a time when Christians were trying to figure out what's going on. There was a lot of people, even, close friends of mine promoting groups like Black Lives Matter and saying that Christians need to support this as a social justice movement. And so a lot of confusion.
Yes. Well, we've talked about this on the show before. In evangelical Christianity, you have a couple of things that you can easily tip the boat over. And one of them is we know that people will come to our churches if they like us. And so we want to do things that make people like us. And that's not always, that's not a great path to truth, even though it's a good path toward, reaching people with the gospel who might not have been reached. And I think the other thing is we get confused about the nature of truth because we don't really know how to access it with a biblical dictionary, so to speak. Like words are our way of orienting ourselves to truth. And that's what you're writing about in the most recent book, which I loved. It's a huge volume talking about 10 key words that if we can understand what these words really mean, not just what a given political party or social movement says that they mean, then we can access truth more effectively. Is that an accurate summary of the project?
Yeah, I wrote this book. I'm president of an organization, Christian ministry organization called the Disciple Nations Alliance, and historically, the church has discipled not just people as individuals, but has had influence profoundly on entire nations. The word nations is prominently featured in the Bible all the way from Genesis 12 through the Great Commission and into Revelation. God wants
Acts
us to
17.
be salt and light and impacting nations. And, one of the ways that the church has done this most profoundly historically has been through the Bible, the translation of the Bible, bringing words from the Bible into common languages. It's funny that today when we talk about Christian influence on nations, people get uptight. There's a group that will call you a Christian nationalist, and that's a bad thing. You're trying to set up some kind of Christian caliphate. Historically, Christians haven't influenced nations in that way. We don't take over governments and impose laws. What we do is we bring the beautiful and powerful words of the Bible, words like freedom and justice and even truth, quite frankly, that word. We bring those into cultures and we bring them into education and just the common use of the nation, and it changes those nations. And it's funny, I think non-Christians in our moment today understand this better than Christians. They've been using words and language, redefining them really, in order to shape culture. And so my purpose in writing this book was to remind the church that this is actually our mission, using these powerful biblical words to disciple nations, to help nations to thrive and to flourish.
Several years ago, somebody gave me a copy of the Webster 1828 dictionary. And this is an instructive thing.
Yes.
If you're watching or listening to this show, if you can find a copy of the Webster's 1828, get a copy of that and then compare it with your current Merriam-Webster dictionary, and you will see exactly what Scott is talking about. That if you want to change society, the first thing you have to do is redefine all of the words. And so coming back to a biblical definition of the words is hugely important. We're not going to have time to go through all 10 of the words in your book that you explore extensively, but I think we'll get to maybe we'll get to 5 or 6 of them. But there's something you said at the beginning of the book. You said this is really important. I'm going to read it carefully. Our formation in Christ-likeness must be grounded in the proper biblical meaning of words. If we are to experience a revival in the church and a reformation of culture, it won't happen without recovering a biblical lexicon. Now, I wonder, there might be somebody who just heard that and think, biblical lexicon, come on, words are words. They just mean what they mean. So explain what the real battle is and why it's so important to think about words accurately.
Yeah. I don't want to geek out on words because I know for most people that just immediately sounds boring, but because words are something we just use all the time and we don't hardly ever think about them. We just use language for communication like we're doing right now. But just pause for a second and just step back and look at words for a second and just what are they, and just what an amazing thing they are that we use words, animals don't. We use words and language, we speak, we communicate because God is that way, right? We're made in His image and God is a God who communicates. He wrote down the 10 Commandments with His finger. He communicates to us in language. He communicated the Scriptures to us in words and language. And my mentor, Darrell Miller, he said something that really changed my life. He said, when God created, he created through the power of his spoken word. Think about that. Everything that exists was created by God's spoken word. In the beginning, John said, the Gospel of John says, was the Word. That's how important words are. Now, Darrell went on and he said, God created everything through his spoken word, and human beings made in his image also create through language. We don't create out of nothing like God does, but we create cultures. Our words shape cultures, and that is such a true and a profound statement. You have to understand that. And biblical words that have true biblical definitions, probably have more power to change culture than just about anything. And when you redefine those words, as the enemies of the gospel have done in our day, think of a word like marriage. When you redefine it, that also changes culture because it shapes the way people understand, it shapes the way they think, it gets embedded in a law. That law then goes on and teaches people about what marriage is, et cetera, et cetera. So if you want to change a culture, it's not simply let's just change laws or let's just change, whatever. You have to go all the way back to words and definitions. They're foundational.
This is such a huge point because I think most people, when they think of changing the culture, they think, well, I guess I'm going to do it by having a family and trying to raise them to be good people. I'm going to change it through my business or through my work. I'm going to change culture through my voting for people who I think will advocate for right laws and overturning wrong ones.
And those are all important things. Don't misunderstand. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you have to go back even further.
You do. Yes.
That if people who want to destroy civilization do it by redefining words, then the most radical thing you can do is to reclaim the real meaning of those words.
That's right.
Let's talk about some of them.
Yeah.
Let's start with truth.
Yep. And that was the first word that on purpose, that was the first word that I took on in the book.
The very first word. And I get that. I wrote that book, Truth Changes Everything, which you and I have talked about, because we live in a post-truth culture.
Right.
And it has not led us to someplace good. It's not led us to unity and trust. It's led us to disunity and distrust. So talk a little bit about reclaiming truth, objective truth.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, I start each chapter with what I consider to be a relatively simple or concise definition. I try to kind of make this as simple as I can for lay people. This is not an academic book. And so I start by saying, here's my understanding of this, the true definition of this word from the scriptures. And then here's how it's been redefined in the culture. I kind of put those up side by side so people can feel and see and feel the difference. So on the word truth, the definition of truth is the simplest of all these words. It's I put it this way: it's that which accords with or corresponds with objective reality. That which is actually real.
And reality is that is the key. yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Now today it's been redefined in a couple of different ways, and I put it this way: truth is an internal, personal, and subjective sense of reality that exists only in the mind. In other words, there's not a truth that's out there beyond what we ourselves perceive. We have our truth, but there isn't the truth, so to speak. And that's the postmodern view. That's the postmodern view. That's right. And then, the second kind of one I put forward here is that truth is a social construction created to advantage a dominant group. So you hear a lot about that in social justice discourse, that there isn't objective truth. Truth is a weapon kind of used by a dominant group to kind of oppress or to advantage itself and to oppress others. So that's the way truth is kind of talked about and understood in our culture today. There isn't. It's a funny thing because when you talk about objective reality, you talk about basic facts. There is a certain level at which we all agree with that, whether you're a postmodernist or not, right? You can think of any number of examples. If my boss decides to cut my paycheck in half, at my next pay period, I could say, hey, what are you doing? And he could say, yeah, well, I've got a different reality a different truth of what your pay should be this month. And you would go, no, there's an objective truth that we agreed on to that, So people are not consistent at all on this. But when it comes to issues of morality, especially kind of philosophy or anything objectively, I'm not sure the way, but that's where it becomes very contested, and people kind of argue that there's no such thing as objective truth. It's all subjective, internal, and then of course it can be used for power purposes as well.
Right. And that actually even goes back to the very idea of words. Are words the things we use to describe reality as it actually exists? Or are words the things we use to actually give the appearance that there is such a thing as reality?
Exactly. You're speaking of, when we talk about truth, you have to say, is there a true definition of words? A lot of people will struggle with that, but Christians, we say, yeah, there is a true definition of words because there is a God, and that God spoke, and he revealed the definition of really important words that are not up for, they're not up to be redefined. We don't have that right because God himself, the creator of all, defined them. So there is a true definition. Of course, today people will say, no, there isn't. These are words can be redefined, and whoever can redefine the word in order to gain advantage or power, right? It's all about power nowadays in our postmodern culture. It's just a contest for language.
Scott, when I was in my doctoral program, I noticed the kind of contradiction that you're talking about. I was expected to master certain facts of our field. There was an objectively true understanding of what a good dissertation would be. And yet in class, it was always this, words change through time. Societies determine what they mean in order to achieve certain goals. When somebody says that to you, when they say, look, words change through time, there are certain words. If you were in the 1920s and you talked about the gay 20s, you would not be talking about what the word gay means today. So there are understandings that change through time. Kind of give us from a biblical perspective why this word truth cannot be one of those words that just society will determine through its usage what it means.
Yeah, no, obviously there's a lot of words, and when I chose 10 words, and you could go obviously more than 10, but I'm looking for words that, first of all, are widely used in the culture. These are really important words. We use them all the time, and they tend to be foundational words. But more than that, these are all deeply biblical words. In a way that a word like gay, isn't. Now, I'm not saying that those words, so I don't, I'll be honest with you, Jeff, I don't have a real clear kind of statement on the question that you're probing right now. There are certain words that come to us from the Bible that I think are more important than maybe just words that we would use in everyday language, like, Microsoft, or some of these names that maybe have a certain time, certain place that they're relevant for. I'm not as interested in those words, let's say, as I am in these words that come from the scriptures that have a historic meaning because they've been given to us by God.
When you start with a biblical understanding of truth, and that begins with the authority of God's word, I suppose if you don't accept the authority of God's word, then you're kind of in a vacuum as to how you will approach this. You almost by default end up assuming that truth is whatever the dominant group in charge says it is. So you begin with the authority of God's word.
Yeah.
And yeah.
No, I think, yes, I think even if you don't, I think there's a way of understanding truth without necessarily saying I affirm the Bible, even though obviously for Christians that's where that's very important. I think when I write about the word truth, I talk about how there was an understanding for a long time that the phenomena, the kind of truth was based in the phenomena around us in the natural world. We can understand through science something about the truthfulness of this world and the way that it worked, the way that it functioned, the fact that the sun rises each morning and sets, and there's an order to it, And then the question then becomes what's the source of that order, right? How
Right.
is it that we have this kind of truthful, orderly universe, right? And so there's a way of getting at truth, objective truth, I think, through kind of almost a natural theology type of approach. But ultimately, it is rooted in the Bible. So yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. There are a lot of things we understand, and we can understand fairly accurately without really understanding much of the source.
Yes.
But that's a key one, that word truth. And my understanding of the way that was used in Greek, aletheia, is actually the word for reality. That the correspondence between truth, the word truth, and the word reality is there wasn't a distinction in the Greek mind. We're talking about reality itself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That Greek word, by the way, that aletheia, and I'm probably mispronouncing that, I thought was a very interesting word. Lanthano is the root of that, which means to lie hidden. And so the Greek word aletheia, they added that participle at the beginning of it, aletheia, which means that which was hidden has now been revealed. So it was this kind of idea of revelation. It was talking about Jesus. Jesus is the truth, right? This mystery from ages past that's now been revealed. Jesus is the truth, aletheia. Wow. So it's kind of a fascinating word.
That's cool. That's worth getting, looking at a site like Bible Hub, looking back at the original, where you can see the English and the Greek, and then just hit the little Strong's Concordance number and look at some of those.
The Old Testament word too, and I'm trying to remember what that. It's the same word as the word for faith, actually. Truth and faith are very closely related, and the Greek, or not the Greek, but the Hebrew idea was firmness. Something that's solid, that is unchanging, that's reliable, right? That's true. So a person is a truthful person if they have integrity, they're reliable, they're trustworthy, they don't lie. Truthful things don't change. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He's true, right? You can count on it. So there's this kind of close connection in the Old Testament between truth and faith. Faith is that which you trust based on the fact that it's true, that it's reliable, that it's trustworthy, that it's not a lie, it's not false. So I found that to be really interesting as well. So.
That is fascinating. And you dig into a lot of this in the book, which I love. I love to geek out on this. Listen, if you're watching or listening to this and you're a word nerd, you're going to love this book. And it's called 10 Words to Heal Our Broken World. I mentioned that, I think, as we began the show. But, we got to dig into some others here. Let's talk about humanity. That's a central issue related to a lot of the topics we talk about in terms of law: abortion, euthanasia, gender identity. It all gets back to what it means to be human. Can you talk about the biblical versus the secular understanding of that? Yeah, this is a word that's been so radically redefined, hasn't it? Throughout the 20th, 18th, 19th, and 20th century. But the biblical understanding of human is absolutely radical and profound, and there's nothing else like it in any religion, if you will, or any other worldview. This is really radically unique. The Bible defines human this way: it's pertaining to man,
human, male and female, mankind. Humans are physical and spiritual beings created by God in His image with intrinsic dignity, incalculable worth, and unalienable rights to life and to liberty. Humans are created for an intimate relationship with their Creator, as well as relationships with each other, and God created humans to wisely steward and govern the created world, and they're accountable to Him for how they carry out this task. That's a long definition, but there's so many important aspects of what it means to be human in the Bible. I mean, it's layer upon layer of really vital meanings. But at a most basic level, I think we are created beings, and we're created in God's image. Those are the most basic kind of understandings. Now, that's been redefined, of course, in the 20th century, mainly through philosophers and scientists like Charles Darwin. So today, what it means to be human is, first, a form of animal life, a product of a purposeless process of material evolution. You could think of it as a biological machine. People are biological machines. Secondly, and this is now kind of the more postmodern understanding of what it means to be human, humans are radically autonomous, willing creatures. They're independent, self-determining agents. It's this idea that I create truth. I'm the source. I'm kind of a small g God, if you will. And then the social justice or the Marxist understanding, I put that down here as well, because that's also on tap today. Human beings are socially and historically determined creatures. In other words, they are representatives of particular cultures or identity groups. So what defines me as a human being in this view is the group that I came from, things that are marked by sex or skin color. That's all that matters. That's what defines me. So when you walk into a classroom and if you're white like I am and you're immediately defined as an oppressor, it's this view that who you are is determined by your group identities. All of these are by the way, all three of these redefined views are highly destructive, as you can see. So when these begin to shape a culture, it leads to conflict, it leads to death, it leads to destruction. The biblical understanding, on the other hand, is unbelievably powerful in terms of its ability to bring about human flourishing in life, because it just places such incredible dignity and value on all human beings, regardless of things like skin color, sex. There's probably no more powerful word than this one that has changed this world than this biblical understanding of what it means to be human.
Yeah, I see that. So when somebody in a classroom hears the professor say, well, humans are at root nothing more than, then you're dealing with somebody whose reductionist understanding of the world is trying to cut away at that core God-given value that God has given to each human being.
That's right. Yeah,
wow.
That's right. And it's not livable and you're right to use the word reduce. So many of these redefinitions are just reductions. They cut God out. So when you cut God out and we're not created, we're evolved or whatever it is, then you reduce human beings. So this Darwinian view of the human being is one that reduces us to just matter. We're material machines, we're biological machines. And I read this in one of Nancy Pearcey's great books. She was talking about a scientist who really believed that. Like that was how he viewed human beings. And he talked about his own children. And he said that he had to actually work. It took work for him to view his children as biological machines or as robots.
Wow.
But he said, but that's what they were. And the person that was questioning him, it was kind of, she was describing an interview, asked this question next. She said, do you treat them that way? Do you treat them like they're robots, biological machines? And he said, no. In other words, so he said, well, how do you treat them? Well, I love them. Well, love, what's that word, right? I mean, where does that come from, right?
Right.
And so but to reduce us to biological machines, you have to cut away things like love. Love makes no sense, in a purely mechanistic, biological, material world, right? What in the heck is love? And why would you, but we're made like this is the thing. He couldn't live with his own worldview because he's made to love his children. Right?
Yeah,
you just can't get away from that. So I thought that was very fascinating.
That's powerful. Well, I know Marvin Minsky always used that term, meat machine.
Yes.
And when I first read that, I just thought he was trying to be controversial, trying to be dramatic, trying to get attention. But I think you're right. He really did.
That's the basic view. Yep.
His worldview led him to that. Whether he lived consistently with his worldview is a separate question. Yeah. But he certainly is encouraging everyone else to live consistently with his worldview.
Yeah. It's such a deadly worldview too. When you reduce people to just material machines and then you layer it on like we're doing today and you say things like, and these material machines are actually a blight on the world, we're consuming scarce resources, when you put these ideas together, you are setting the stage for really a lot of deadly kind of consequences. People often talk about how our world today is overpopulated, that the climate crisis that we're facing is due to too much consumption on the part of human beings, and that we need to get the human population down to something like 1 billion from its present 5+. And I take that really seriously. As you well know, Jeff, ideas have consequences, and if you believe these ideas about human beings and the effect of human beings on creation, then people expect people to do dramatic things that will shock you and end up being very deadly. Don't be surprised by that, and that's what we're seeing some of that. So,
yeah, and I'm not saying that any of I'd hope that I wouldn't do anything dramatic if I ended up with the wrong understanding of a word, but it certainly, if I have a wrong understanding of human value, my instincts change, my reflex actions change.
Absolutely.
Those 15 to 20,000 decisions that I make every day will be made differently.
Absolutely.
As opposed to having that instinct, this is a human. This is different than an animal.
And it cuts right to the core, for example, of some of the most controversial issues in our culture, like abortion. So what is, growing inside of the womb of the mother, that's a decision that everyone has to kind of wrestle with at some point. This isn't just something academic. Is it just a blob of tissue with no intrinsic worth or value that I can easily discard of if I choose to, if it's convenient? Or is it a God-created being that God himself gives value and dignity to, and it's not my right? I have no right to end the life of that. I mean, so that matters so much, and this word more than any I could go on and on with, because it leads to just dramatic cultural differences in so many ways.
There, in the time that we have, I wanted to talk about marriage, and I wanted to talk about a couple of the other words here.
Yeah.
When we talk about marriage, that's undergone a significant legal redefinition.
Yes.
I mean, this new understanding of marriage, as opposed to a biblical one, is now enshrined in law. And I wonder, Scott, there are a lot of people who say, well, that ship has sailed. We're stuck with this. How should Christians understand God's design for marriage, even though it's going to be against the grain of what now seems to be a settled question in our society?
Yeah, good question. But I almost think that brings us back to the first word we were discussing, truth. And that is that there is a true definition of marriage. And if the culture changes, redefines marriage, enshrines that redefined false view of marriage in the law, none of that changes the truth about marriage. There is a truth about marriage, okay? This is a God-ordained, God-created institution. So what does that mean for Christians? We don't abandon the truth. Laws change; they can be changed again. And so we have to. I don't think it helps us to shrug our shoulders and say, "Oh, that ship has sailed." No, there's a true definition. We have to know it, and we have to defend it, and we have to live it, regardless of what's happening in the culture. And probably no word is more important than this word, marriage. This word, let me just go back and talk about this a little bit, because when I wrote this book, when I started thinking about writing this book, this word had a kind of real revolutionary impact on my thinking, because you mentioned the 1828 dictionary, which was one of our founding fathers, Noah Webster, wrote, and he wrote that book with a very specific dictionary with a very specific purpose in mind. He said, this country of free people cannot retain its freedom if it's not grounded in true biblical definitions of words. In other words, there's a connection between truth and freedom in the Bible. We can't retain our freedom without a biblical worldview. And people need to understand biblical definitions of words. So he wrote that dictionary, which contains biblical definitions. It's very powerful. So I read
it's beautiful. There's a beauty to it too.
Yeah.
And that's one thing, this is a weird thing to say to people as you're getting ready for your holiday celebrations. You study the dictionary. If it's something like Webster's 1828, it's actually I don't want to say it's devotional, but it is.
It's just really powerful.
It's powerfully worded.
Yeah.
The definitions have a beauty to them. They're well formed. Yeah. And it will sharpen your thinking.
Yeah, and it'll also, it's like a Bible study, because he went to the Bible to define these words. And no more is that true than this word, marriage. And so I read his definition of marriage, and this is, I paraphrased it in the book in terms of the true definition, and it was something like this. He said, marriage is a God-ordained, comprehensive, exclusive, and permanent union that brings together a man and a woman together as to be husband and wife, and to be father and mother to any children that their union brings into being. It's based on the anthropological truth that men and women are different, they're complementary, the biological fact that reproduction depends on a man and a woman, and the social reality that children need a mother and a father in order to flourish. So there's, let's just put a pin in that for a second. When I read that, I thought, wow, this is, somebody once asked me when I was newly married, why should I get married? Now there's so many marriages end in divorce, and they weren't a Christian, and they were really wondering, like, why in the world would I do that? What's the point of it? Because why don't I just live together, right, with this woman that I'm, living with? Why get married? What's the point? And I remember thinking, I don't have a really good answer to that question. You should get married because you should get married because what we do, And I thought that doesn't cut it. And when I went to this definition, I thought, wow, marriage is so foundational to the entire culture, because it links together man and woman as husband and wife, as father and mother, as the primary educators of their children, and everything kind of is based on, flows from those basic relationships. So I went to the Microsoft has a dictionary, and if you use Microsoft Word, you can hover over any word and look it up in a dictionary that's embedded in your laptop or your computer. So I did that with this word, marriage, and I was stunned. Listen to how it was redefined in the dictionary that's in our laptops everyone's using today. Marriage is a legally recognized, romantic, caregiving relationship between consenting adults who intend to live together as sexual and domestic partners.
Wow.
Just think about how radically different that definition is from what I found in Noah Webster's dictionary, which is based in the biblical. So many things are gone. God is gone, first of all. Man and woman is gone, right? Male, female, that's gone. Even the idea that it's two, right? Husband and wife, two, that's gone. It's a legally recognized romantic caregiving relationship between consenting adults who intend to live together as sexual and domestic partners. What else is missing? Children. Mm-hmm. No mention of children or procreation. So sex now here in this definition has been completely separated from children, much less their caregiving and their upbringing. So marriage in this new definition is all about adults and their sexual desires. It has nothing to do with children and future generations. But in the Bible, the true definition of marriage is kind of almost all about that. It's certainly about the husband and the wife, don't get me wrong, but it's about much more than that. It's much bigger than that. And that's what, and again, what kind of cultures are going to be built around this one word? How different of a culture will be built around these two different definitions? It's radical, profound change. So
yeah. Well, the biblical idea of marriage is multi-generational. It is. It isn't just about you.
It isn't just about you.
It is about things that are going to happen long after your physical body ceases to exist. Yeah. Well, Scott, I guess I kind of want to ask this because I know as I'm thinking about the holidays and families getting back together, there are going to be people who are watching or listening who are going to have family members come who are in same-sex marriages or something like that. How do you hold this conviction while valuing those people?
Yeah, there's a passage in Timothy. I wish I could pull it up right now or I had it memorized. I really should memorize it. I think it's in 1 Timothy that he talks about this, and he talks about how we are to treat others with gentleness and respect who don't share our convictions or our beliefs in hope that, God will rescue them from Satan and his deceptions so that they themselves can be set free and live full and flourishing lives. Again, that's a real strong paraphrase of what Paul was saying there.
Yeah, no, it's accurate. Yeah,
but I like that a lot.
Chapter 2,
these are people that have bought into lies and deceptions that are harming them. How do we treat them? With gentleness and respect at the same time that we defend the truth of these words. So you have to do both, and that's the biblical imperative. Speak the truth in love, with gentleness, with respect, not out of a desire to beat someone up and win an argument, but recognizing that you want them, they're in bondage to Satan and deception and lies, and you want them to be free, right? You don't want that. You want them to flourish and to thrive as human beings. So that's got to be the heart motivation there. But you don't do that by abandoning the truth of these words, because these words, the true definitions, are the very things that are going to help, that are going to set them free.
Well, that word free is the perfect segue to the final word that I want to talk about in the time we have together, which is freedom.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people today believe that true freedom requires you to abandon a Judeo-Christian perspective.
Absolutely. That's how it's been misunderstood or redefined in the culture. That's right.
Yeah. Well, talk a little bit about the biblical understanding of freedom.
Yeah. Well, just maybe I'll start on this one with the redefinition that we were just talking about. This is really commonly understood by people in the culture that freedom is the power or the right to act, speak, or think as you want without any hindrance or restraint, to basically do what you want. And maybe there's one, kind of caveat put on that, as long as it doesn't harm anyone else, right? But even that, of course, how do you square that with things like millions of babies being aborted, right? Right. So, but it's this idea, this simple idea that I can do whatever I want. That's freedom. Freedom is just the right to do what I want. So the Bible says, okay, there's some truth to that. The biblical definition says at the heart of freedom is choice. This freedom to make choices. We're not robots. God didn't create us as robots. That's really profound. One of the very first things God said to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden is, you are free. You are free. Then he went on and said to eat from any of the trees of the garden except, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But that phrasing right away from God to Adam and Eve, you are free. Why are we free? Why did God make us? Why didn't he, this is a profound question. Why didn't he just make us like robots so he could control what we do? It would save him a lot of heartbreak because we've been so rebellious. Because God himself is free. Nobody compels him. He does what he wills. And when he made us in his image, that was his choice to make us in his image and likeness. That means that he made us free as well. Now, we're not free on the same level that God is free, and people struggle with that. What do you mean by that? Well, your children, if you have young children, they may have a degree of freedom. You may give them a degree of freedom. You don't do everything for them. But their freedom isn't as great as your freedom because you can put some constraints around that freedom, some limits for their own protection and their own good. And ideally, as they grow and they mature and they can self-govern, and this is a really important concept, then that sphere, that boundary of freedom grows with them as well. So the biblical idea, this is the way I define it. It's the capacity, freedom is the capacity to self-govern, to act according to your choices, one's choices, within God's created order and under his moral law. So freedom isn't freedom to do whatever you want. If you and here's this is the interesting thing about freedom. If you do whatever you want, that can actually lead to bondage, slavery.
Right.
And we see this like with drug addiction very clearly, right? I just take as many drugs as I want. Well, pretty soon you find that you're not free at all. You're in bondage to whatever that addiction happens to be. So freedom can't be the freedom to do whatever I want. There has to be limits or constraints on it. And when you accept those, then you're truly free. This is the biblical idea. You're truly free when you're living within and respecting God's design and creation. I give the example of somebody who wants to jump out of an airplane without a parachute. Are you free to do that? Yeah, you're free to do that. But you're denying the law of gravity, and so that freedom isn't going to last very long for you, right?
That's right.
So you have to kind of accept that you live in a world, and you have to accept the natural laws that function around you. You're not free to violate them unless you want to harm yourself. And here's the other thing, you're not free to violate the moral laws because those are immutable as well. If you violate the moral laws, think of the 10 Commandments, that itself is going to lead you into bondage. So freedom comes within the constraints or the parameters that God established. People struggle with that, but I say, well, again, I'm sorry, I just kind of ramble here, but if you like any kind of sport, that's the way sports work, or any game for that matter. Basketball only works when there's kind of limits and constraints. There's rules, and everyone agrees from the outset to follow those rules. If you don't follow those rules, it just becomes chaos, and you don't have a game. But if you agree with those rules, then there's a lot of freedom within that to excel. There's a lot of beauty. There's a lot of power. You can come up with unique plays. You can hone your skills. That's the way freedom is. God made us to be truly free, but to be free, it has to operate within those constraints that God has imposed.
Now, I like the sports analogy a lot because you don't become a good player just by following the rules.
No,
the
that's
rules
right.
give you a world in which you can become a great player.
That's right.
And where you're playing at a high level is meaningful. So
that can only happen within the constraint of those rules, right? There would be no sport to play other than that, you see.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Wow. Well, this is a great discussion. And I really appreciated the title of your book, Scott, 10 Words to Heal Our Broken World. We aren't just talking about reclaiming a biblical definition so we can cinch down control on society. We're talking about this. That's why it's perfect. And on the word freedom. What are the core principles that make a life or a world of flourishing even possible?
Exactly.
So, Thank you. Well, this is going to be fun. I'm sure we're going to get commentary from people saying, okay, I've spent my Christmas break reading the dictionary. Find the Webster's 1828. It's probably a website, but you definitely want to, if you're going to just get a book for your library to hand on generation after generation, get a hard copy of it someplace. Yeah. I don't even know exactly where that would be, but it's glorious to think through what are these words that help us understand the world that God has created and help us bring healing to a broken world.
And to our own lives, Jeff, if I could just add that. I mean, this is very practical because we actually build our lives based around the definition of these words. And as I was writing and researching this book, I found in my own life and my own thinking how deeply I personally have been shaped by the false redefinition of these words. And there's a deception here because, right, we think we understand a word like justice because it's in the Bible. Justice, I understand justice. But it's been redefined. You have to understand these words have all been redefined in the culture in ways that are false. They're counterfeit. And you've likely absorbed, just like I have, a lot of that without even knowing it. And so my hope for people as they read this book is to wrestle with how much have I absorbed the false redefinitions and kind of built my life around those in a way that's been harmful for me and my family and my children, and go, okay, I've got to change. I've got to kind of lay aside these false understandings and begin to build around the truth. And when you do, you're going to see immediately positive changes in your own life, much less the culture.
One of our late instructors at Summit Ministries, Michael Bauman, always used to say, when words lose their meaning, people lose their lives.
Yeah, very powerful.
And we could be mad or cynical about this, Scott, but what I appreciate about your book is that getting mad that society's redefined all of these things or being cynical about society isn't really the response. The response is to go back, reclaim the truth, and reorient your own heart and mind toward that truth.
That's right.
So
and defend it. Defend
then
it publicly. That's what it means to be salt and light. We've got to be the ones who are stewards of the true definitions of these words in this generation and then pass that on to the next generation. That's a big part of your Christian calling. And that requires, in a time like ours when words have been redefined and there's a lot of pressure and coercion to kind of accept these false definitions, it requires courage and a level of commitment. But guess what? That's exciting. Build your life, make that your mission. I'm going to defend and I'm going to live out the true definitions of these words in this generation so that they can be passed on.
So good. Scott, I'm really grateful for your taking time to be on the Truth Changes Everything show today.
It's such an honor. And again, Jeff, thanks for all that you did to read through this book and to give the endorsement. I'm truly honored and grateful.
That's one of the best parts of my job is I get to talk to people like you, read books, write endorsements or whatever. I get paid to look at things and study them, and it's pretty fantastic. But really grateful for you, brother.
And likewise, grateful for you, Jeff, grateful for the incredible work you do and for the ministry of Summit Ministries. Just keep up that great work. It's so important.
Thank you to my guest, Scott Allen, for coming on the show. You can learn more about Scott's work at disciplenations.org. This podcast is a resource of Summit Ministries. We exist to come alongside the rising generation, their trainers, parents, and influencers, so that young people may know God's truth and become champions of a biblical worldview. If you want to learn more about Summit Ministries or get resources to help the young people in your life embrace and share the truth that changes everything, just go to summit.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.